In this episode, we are moving into one of the most practical parts of risk management because it focuses on how organizations decide what safeguards they actually need and how they know whether those safeguards make sense. Many new learners understand that controls are supposed to reduce risk, but the harder question is how a business chooses the right controls in the first place. That choice is rarely as simple as buying a tool, copying a policy, or following a checklist without thinking. For someone studying certified in Risk and Information Systems Control, CRISC, this topic matters because a control is only valuable when it fits the risk, supports the business, and works in the real world instead of only on paper. Good control design, careful control selection, and thoughtful control analysis help an organization avoid two common failures at once. The first failure is having too few controls to reduce meaningful exposure, and the second failure is having too many poorly chosen controls that create cost, confusion, delay, and false confidence without solving the actual problem. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Control design begins with a simple but important idea. A control must exist for a reason. That sounds obvious, yet many organizations end up with controls that were added long ago, copied from another environment, or introduced after a past incident without anyone asking whether they still match the current risk. A well-designed control is not random, and it is not decorative. It is meant to influence a specific exposure, business condition, or operating requirement in a way that improves outcomes. That means design begins by understanding what the organization is trying to protect, what could go wrong, why it matters, and how the business actually functions in the area being reviewed. A control designed without that understanding may look responsible while missing the real source of risk. Beginners sometimes imagine control design as a technical exercise, but it is really a business and risk exercise first. The organization must know what needs to be achieved before it decides how to enforce, monitor, or support that achievement through process, people, technology, or physical safeguards. One of the biggest lessons in control design is that the control objective must be clear before the control itself can be chosen. A control objective is the result the organization wants the control to support, such as preventing unauthorized access, ensuring only approved changes reach production, protecting sensitive data from improper exposure, or making sure critical systems can be restored after disruption. When the objective is vague, the control choice often becomes vague too. Teams may then implement something that sounds strong, but does not actually address the most important condition. For example, if the real concern is accountability over privileged access, a generic security reminder to staff will not solve the problem. The organization may need approval workflows, individual accounts, logging, and regular review instead. A beginner should hear this clearly. Controls are not supposed to impress people with activity. They are supposed to influence specific risks and business conditions. The more clearly the organization defines the problem and the desired outcome, the more likely it is to design a control that is relevant, proportionate, and useful. Risk context shapes control design because the same control is not equally appropriate everywhere. A safeguard that makes perfect sense in a highly regulated financial system may be excessive in a low-risk internal collaboration tool. On the other hand, a light-touch process that works well for an ordinary administrative function may be dangerously weak in an environment that handles sensitive customer data or supports essential business operations. This is why mature control design pays attention to data sensitivity, business criticality, legal obligations, user population, system exposure, dependency on third parties, and the likely impact if something fails. A control should reflect the environment where it operates rather than some generic idea of what security ought to look like. Beginners often want one universal answer because it feels safer and simpler, but risk management is more thoughtful than that. Strong design asks what matters here, under these conditions, for this process, with these users, and for this level of consequence. When context is ignored, controls are often either too weak to matter or so burdensome that staff begin looking for ways around them. Business alignment is another essential part of control design because organizations do not exist only to reduce risk. They also exist to serve customers, deliver products, support operations, and pursue strategic goals. A control that reduces risk but makes the business unable to function well is not automatically a good control. That does not mean convenience should always win. It means effective design balances protection with practicality. If a control delays urgent work, frustrates users, breaks useful workflows, or creates constant exceptions, the organization may respond by bypassing it, weakening it, or quietly abandoning it in practice. A control is much more likely to succeed when it supports reliable operations instead of fighting them at every turn. For beginners, this is a crucial point because it explains why security decisions are rarely as simple as choosing the strictest possible option. Good design respects the business environment while still reducing meaningful risk. The goal is not to create hardship to prove seriousness. The goal is to create discipline that people can realistically follow and leaders can realistically sustain. Control selection becomes easier once the organization understands the objective and the business context, because it can then choose the type of control that best fits the need. Some situations call for preventive controls that stop unwanted activity before it happens, such as access approvals, segregation of duties, or technical restrictions that block prohibited actions. Other situations require detective controls that reveal unusual or unauthorized activity so the organization can respond quickly, such as monitoring, reconciliation, alerting, or review of exception reports. In some cases, corrective or recovery controls are essential because the organization knows that not every event can be prevented and must be prepared to restore operations or reduce damage after the fact. A beginner should notice that selection is rarely a matter of picking one perfect control and declaring victory. Most meaningful risks require a combination of control types working together. Prevention without detection can leave failures unnoticed, and detection without recovery can leave the organization aware of damage but unable to restore service or trust. Selection is strongest when it treats controls as part of a coordinated response rather than isolated pieces. Layering matters because risk rarely respects a single defensive boundary. If an organization relies on just one control for a high-impact area, that control becomes a single point of failure. A stronger approach often involves multiple complementary controls that cover different failure paths without creating unnecessary duplication. For example, a sensitive application might use role-based access restrictions, formal approvals, logging, periodic access review, and incident response preparation rather than trusting any one of those measures alone. This is sometimes called defense in depth, but the deeper lesson is simply that important risks deserve more than one chance to be stopped, noticed, or contained. At the same time, layering must be done thoughtfully. Adding more controls does not always add more security if the controls overlap poorly, confuse ownership, or create such complexity that no one can tell which one is supposed to catch what. Beginners should think of layering as designing support, not clutter. The point is to reduce the chance that one mistake, one missed review, or one weak setting allows the whole protection model to fail at once. A good control also needs a clear owner, because a control that belongs to everyone often belongs to no one in practice. Ownership means someone is accountable for making sure the control exists, operates as intended, stays current, and is improved or retired when conditions change. That owner may not personally perform every part of the control, but there should be no confusion about who is responsible for its health and performance. In real organizations, unclear ownership is one of the fastest ways for controls to decay. Reports are not reviewed, access reviews are delayed, policies are not updated, and technical settings drift because everyone assumes another team is watching. For beginners, this is an important reminder that a control is not just a rule or a tool. It is part of an operating process. If no one is clearly responsible for that process, even a well-designed control can become ineffective over time. Strong selection and design, therefore, include governance questions from the beginning, not as an afterthought once the control is already in place and slowly falling out of use. Another major part of control design is deciding whether the control should be manual, automated, or a combination of both. Manual controls can provide judgment, context, and flexibility, which is useful in situations where human interpretation matters. However, manual controls can also be inconsistent, slow, and vulnerable to distraction, fatigue, or poor follow-through. Automated controls can increase consistency, scale well across large environments, and reduce dependence on individual attention, but they can also fail silently if they are badly configured, poorly monitored, or built on incorrect assumptions. Many strong control environments use a hybrid approach, where systems enforce or collect certain actions while humans review exceptions, make approvals, or interpret results. Beginners should avoid the temptation to assume automated always means better. The right choice depends on the risk, the volume of activity, the tolerance for error, the maturity of the environment, and the need for judgment. Control design is strongest when it chooses the operating style that matches the reality of the business instead of following a simple preference for either people or technology. Selection also requires thinking about cost and proportionality, because organizations have limited resources and not every risk deserves the same investment. A control may be technically impressive and still be the wrong choice if its cost, complexity, and maintenance burden greatly outweigh the exposure it is supposed to reduce. On the other hand, choosing a very cheap or easy control can be a serious mistake if it leaves a critical business process badly exposed. Proportionality means the control response should match the significance of the risk and the value of what is being protected. This does not mean every decision must be reduced to exact mathematics. It means leaders should think honestly about impact, likelihood, operating burden, and residual risk after the control is applied. For beginners, proportionality is one of the clearest signs of mature risk judgment. It helps explain why two organizations facing similar technical issues may choose different control responses based on their data, their business model, their regulatory environment, and their tolerance for disruption. Good selection is thoughtful, not merely strict or merely cheap. Control analysis is what helps the organization decide whether a proposed or existing control is truly suitable. Analysis asks questions such as whether the control addresses the actual risk, whether it fits into the process where it will operate, whether users can follow it realistically, whether it creates new risks or bottlenecks, whether it overlaps with existing safeguards, and whether its performance can be observed over time. This kind of analysis is important before implementation and after implementation because a control that seems sound in planning may behave very differently once it meets real users, real workloads, and real business deadlines. A beginner should understand that analysis is not a sign of indecision. It is part of responsible design. Without analysis, organizations often choose controls that sound good in meetings but fail during everyday operations. Strong analysis helps leaders move beyond fashion, vendor claims, or habit and focus instead on suitability, effectiveness, and operational fit. It turns control selection from a guess into an informed judgment based on the environment as it actually exists. Residual risk is an important concept in control analysis because no control removes all exposure. Even after a safeguard is designed and implemented, some risk remains. That remaining exposure is called residual risk, and organizations need to decide whether it is acceptable, whether additional controls are needed, or whether a different business decision should be made altogether. Beginners sometimes think the goal of control design is total elimination of risk, but that is not realistic in most real environments. The true goal is to reduce risk to a level the organization can tolerate while still functioning effectively. This is why analysis must consider not only whether the control works in some general sense, but whether it works enough for the importance of the asset, the seriousness of the threat, and the obligations the organization must meet. If a proposed control leaves too much residual risk, it may need to be strengthened, supplemented, or replaced. Thinking in terms of residual risk helps the organization stay honest. It prevents leaders from confusing action with adequacy and reminds them that doing something is not always the same as reducing exposure enough. Another part of analysis involves looking for unintended consequences, because controls can solve one problem while quietly creating another. A strict approval process might reduce unauthorized change, but also slow urgent operational work so much that staff begin making undocumented workarounds. Heavy monitoring may improve visibility, but also generate so many alerts that important signals are buried under constant noise. A highly restrictive access rule may protect information but interfere with legitimate customer service or emergency response. This does not mean the controls are always wrong. It means the organization must analyze side effects as part of good design rather than pretending every safeguard produces only benefits. Beginners often expect good controls to be universally welcomed once they are introduced, but real environments are more complex. Strong analysis looks not only at the direct security value of the control, but also at how it influences productivity, decision speed, user behavior, and operational resilience. A control that creates chaos, avoidance, or hidden workarounds may not be improving risk as much as it first appears. Controls also need periodic reanalysis because environments change. Business processes evolve, technologies are replaced, mergers happen, regulations shift, attackers change methods, and what was once a sensible control can become outdated, redundant, or too weak for the present condition. An organization that never revisits control design may slowly drift into a mismatch between current risk and old safeguards. This is especially common when controls are added after incidents or audits and then left in place for years without asking whether the original assumptions still hold. For a beginner, this is a useful lesson because it shows that control management is not a one-time project. It is an ongoing discipline. Strong organizations review whether controls still align with business objectives, whether the ownership model still works, whether evidence shows the control is performing well, and whether new dependencies or exposures require adjustment. Good design today does not guarantee good design tomorrow. Control analysis must stay alive long enough to notice when success has become drift and when a once strong safeguard now needs redesign, retirement, or reinforcement. A simple example helps bring all of this together. Imagine an organization wants to protect a financial reporting system from unauthorized changes that could affect critical data and executive decision-making. The control objective is not just general security. It is preserving integrity, accountability, and confidence in a high-impact business process. A thoughtful design might include individual user accounts, manager approval for privileged access, separation between developers and production administrators, logging of sensitive changes, periodic review of privileged activity, and recovery processes if errors occur. Selection would consider which safeguards should be preventive, which should be detective, and how much automation is realistic in that environment. Analysis would then ask whether the controls fit the way teams actually work, whether responsibilities are clear, whether the process creates unreasonable delay, and whether enough residual risk remains to require further treatment. That example shows why this topic matters so much. The best control decision is rarely the most obvious one. It is the one that connects business importance, risk exposure, operating reality, and governance into a response that can actually last. As we close, the main lesson is that control design, selection, and analysis are not about collecting safeguards for appearance or choosing the strictest option by default. They are about understanding the risk clearly, defining the control objective honestly, selecting measures that fit the business and the exposure, and analyzing whether those measures truly reduce risk without creating unacceptable side effects. CRISC expects you to think in that balanced way because mature risk management is not simply about fear or restriction. It is about making thoughtful decisions that support resilience, accountability, and dependable operations. When beginners first approach this topic, it can seem technical or abstract, but the underlying question is very human and very practical. What should we do? Why should we do it? And how do we know it is the right response for this environment? When an organization can answer those questions well, its controls become more than tasks and tools. They become purposeful parts of a system that protects what matters while still allowing the business to move forward.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.